Make yourself comfortable, and let's unravel this elegant puzzle together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from. Let's get started. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when we arrived at Château d'Elie, an elegant manor perched like a jewel amid the rolling green of the English countryside. The journey from London had been uneventful, save for Poirot's frequent fussing over the precise angle of his travelling hat and the state of his moustache, which, according to him, was a delicate masterpiece requiring constant vigilance. As we stepped down from the hired car, I could not help but admire the imposing beauty of the house, its ivy-covered facade, the symmetrical gardens, and a stone fountain in the centre courtyard that splashed gracefully under the golden sunlight. Poirot, however, seemed far more interested in adjusting his gloves. "Château d'Elie," I said, stretching my legs. "A splendid place, eh, Poirot?" Poirot sniffed the air delicately. "Perhaps, mon ami, but a house, no matter how splendid, is but a shell. It is the lives within that concern, Poirot." We were greeted at the door by Colonel Marcus Whitlow, an old acquaintance of Poirot's from some past tangle in Cairo, though I confess I had forgotten the details. Whitlow was a tall, robust man, his sun-creased skin hinting at years spent under the Egyptian sun. He shook our hands vigorously, though Poirot winced slightly at the strength of the gesture. "Ah, Poirot, my friend," Whitlow boomed, "and Captain Hastings. Welcome to my modest little kingdom." Modest it was not. We were led through halls lined with treasures, ancient vases, ornate tapestries, and, most prominently, a cabinet filled with Egyptian artifacts that seemed to hold a place of honor in the main hall. "I've invited a few guests for dinner," Whitlow said, beaming with pride, "and I'm dying to show you my latest acquisitions from the excavation at Saqqara." Poirot raised a brow. "Indeed. The artifacts, they interest Poirot greatly." His fingers traced the air as if handling a delicate clue. We had no way of knowing then, but these treasures would soon draw us into a tale far darker than the sunlit countryside promised. The afternoon flowed into early evening, and soon we found ourselves mingling among a small party of guests assembled on the lawn. Tables had been set beneath striped marquees, and liveried staff glided past with silver trays bearing champagne and canapes. Lady Helena Whitlow, a woman of fragile beauty with a sharpness to her gaze, stood near the centre fountain, entertaining a cluster of guests. Her voice carried just enough for Poirot and me to overhear as we strolled past. "Of course, the artifacts are cursed," Lady Helena said airily, with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Everyone knows the story. Those who possess them meet untimely ends. It is quite romantic, in a ghastly sort of way." There was laughter, but nervous laughter, the kind that arises when one is unsure whether the speaker is serious. The guests glanced at the artifact cabinet visible through the open French doors. Its glinting golden scarabs and carved funeral masks seemed to stare back. "Superstitious nonsense," Marcus said loudly from across the lawn, his voice full of bluster. "Artifacts don't kill people. People do." Poirot gave a small, thoughtful smile, but said nothing. It was then that I noticed a man standing slightly apart from the others, a nervous-looking fellow fiddling incessantly with his cufflinks. His face was pale, his eyes darting toward the artifact cabinet with undisguised unease. I nudged Poirot. "Who's that?" Poirot's eyes followed mine. "A man who knows something he does not wish to know, Hastings. Let us see if he will tell Poirot." Later that evening, as dusk settled and the party thinned, Poirot and I found ourselves on the terrace, enjoying a final glass of wine. The nervous man from the party emerged from the shadows, hesitating before approaching. When he spoke, his voice trembled slightly. "My name is Dr. Leopold Fincher," he said. I need to speak to you, Monsieur Poirot. Privately, if you please." Poirot inclined his head graciously. gesturing for me to remain. Naturally, I positioned myself close enough to overhear. After all, what's the use of being Poirot's trusted companion if one cannot exercise a little healthy curiosity? Dr. Fincher spoke in hurried bursts, as if afraid the house itself might overhear. The curse, it's real, you know. People talk, they laugh, but it's taken 2 already. 2? Poirot's brows lifted. First was Richard Whitlow, the Colonel's cousin. He fell down the main staircase, a fall that broke his neck. They said it was an accident, but I saw the look on his face that very morning. He knew something that terrified him. And the second, Poirot prompted gently. Abel Mayhew, Fincher whispered. The family solicitor, found drowned in the ornamental pond. No sign of struggle, no witnesses. Both men connected to the artifacts? Poirot asked. Dr. Fincher nodded, beads of sweat forming on his brow. They both handled the collection shortly before their deaths. And now, his voice faltered. Now Lady Helena, she says she's seen something. A shadow near the artifacts room. Something unnatural. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Mon cher docteur, Poirot does not believe in curses, but human fear. Ah, that is a poison most deadly. Dr. Fincher departed hastily, leaving Poirot deep in thought. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Poirot and I found ourselves seated in the study, where Dr. Fincher, his hands trembling slightly, recounted the first 2 deaths tied to the so-called curse. The room was lit by a single lamp, throwing long shadows across the polished desk where Whitlow's prized artifacts gleamed under the glass. Richard Whitlow, Fincher began, his voice hushed, was the first. I vaguely recalled meeting Richard at some function years before, a tall, rather arrogant fellow who took great pleasure in correcting everyone's historical facts, whether they wished it or not. He had been examining the collection the evening before his death, Fincher said. Next morning, the housekeeper found him at the foot of the grand staircase, his neck broken, his expression frozen in terror. Poirot tapped his fingertips together. Accidents, mon cher docteur, are rarely so dramatic. And the second? I asked, already sensing a grim pattern. Abel Mayhew, Fincher said. The family solicitor. He was handling the insurance papers for the artifacts. They found him floating face down in the ornamental pond 2 weeks later. No sign of a struggle. No witnesses. Both men had touched the artifacts shortly before their deaths. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Fincher nodded solemnly. It is curious, Poirot murmured. A curse is such a convenient cloak, is it not? One size fits all, covering many sins. But curses, mon ami, do not write insurance policies or walk down staircases. I caught my breath. I knew that look. Poirot's little grey cells were already at work. Dinner that evening was a rather strained affair. The guests seemed ill at ease, conversation confined to safe topics like the weather and local gossip. Even Colonel Whitlow, normally so full of stories from his days in Egypt, seemed unusually quiet, his eyes flickering toward the artifact cabinet with uncomfortable regularity. Lady Helena was pale, though she maintained her customary grace. She had taken her seat at the head of the table, adorned in a dark emerald gown that contrasted sharply with her ashen complexion. Poirot, who never missed the smallest detail, noted her trembling hands as she reached for her glass. As the meal concluded, Lady Helena rose unsteadily. "If you'll excuse me," she said, her voice faint. "I'm not feeling quite myself." I glanced at Poirot, expecting some comment about the effects of country air on delicate constitutions, but he said nothing. His gaze, however, followed Lady Helena with piercing intensity. Barely half an hour later, a piercing scream shattered the calm. We rushed upstairs to find Lady Helena collapsed on the floor of her bedroom, her fingers clutching a small object, one of the very artifacts from the cabinet below. It was a golden amulet, its surface intricately engraved with hieroglyphs that seemed to shimmer in the candlelight. Poirot knelt beside her, his fingers gently prying the amulet from her grasp. His expression was one of deep contemplation, though he said nothing at first. The doctor was summoned, but it was too late. Lady Helena was dead. In the hush that followed Lady Helena's death, the house seemed to exhale in fear. The servants whispered of the curse with trembling voices. The guests retired to their rooms, bolting their doors against invisible forces. Poirot, however, remained resolutely calm. He stood by the fireplace in the study, the amulet resting in his palm, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames. I paced, unable to hide my agitation. "A curse, Poirot," I muttered. "Surely you can't deny it now. 3 lives." "Mon ami," Poirot interrupted, his voice silken. "You have the habit of seeing what is shown to you, but not what is hidden beneath. Let us examine the facts, yes?" He held up the amulet. "This object has passed through many hands, but only some hands have died. Why is that? Is the amulet a poor marksman?" I could not suppress a nervous laugh. "You make it sound absurd when you put it like that." "It is absurd, Hastings. Curses are the invention of the weak mind to explain what it fears to understand." He turned the amulet in his fingers, then looked sharply at me. "No, mon ami, this is not the work of ancient gods. It is the work of human hands. Clever hands, yes, but not divine." He placed the amulet carefully in his pocket. "And Hercule Poirot shall now set those human hands trembling." With that, he rang for the butler and asked to speak with every member of the household at once. The morning after Lady Helena's tragic death dawned bleak and heavy with mist. Poirot, ever immaculate despite the countryside damp, descended to breakfast wearing his grey morning suit, the crease of his trousers sharp enough to cut glass. I, on the other hand, was in desperate need of a stronger cup of tea and some clarity. "Mon cher Hastings," Poirot began, tapping his egg delicately. "Today, we employ the method of observation. Not merely the eyes, you understand, but the mind." "Right," I said, though in truth, I wasn't entirely sure what that meant. "Where do we start?" "With the scene of the crime," Poirot said. "And beyond that, the entire stage on which this little drama unfolds." With Colonel Whitlow's reluctant permission, we commenced a thorough tour of the manor, beginning with the artifact collection. The glass display case stood in the main hall, its gleaming contents catching the weak morning light. Scarabs, figurines, and golden amulets lay upon red velvet, a striking contrast, like jewels resting on blood. Poirot's fingers hovered just above the glass, his eyes narrowing. "Regard, Hastings, the dust, it speaks." "Dust?" I squinted, seeing nothing unusual. Poirot sighed. "Ah, mon ami, observe properly. A perfect fingerprint would not be as revealing. See here, the case has been opened recently, but not by the hand accustomed to it. A slight smudge, and the angle, imprecise." It was true. One corner of the case had a faint smear, as though someone's hand had faltered while opening it. We moved next to Lady Helena's bedroom, where the amulet had been found clutched in her cold fingers. Poirot stood silently for a long moment, then paced the room, his hands behind his back. He inspected the bedside table, the window latch, even the embroidered slippers neatly tucked under the bed. "She was afraid, Hastings," Poirot said softly. "Afraid, but resigned. She expected death, yet still. She fought to understand." "Understand what?" I asked. Poirot gave one of his enigmatic smiles. "That is what we must find out, mon ami." We continued our examination of the house, speaking to the staff, each of whom had their own colourful theory about the curse. The butler swore he heard footsteps in the gallery at night. The maid claimed the artifacts themselves glowed faintly in the dark. Poirot listened without comment, his expression that of a man patiently untangling a very stubborn knot. At last we returned to the main hall, where the artifacts gleamed once more. Poirot stood before the case, his hands clasped. "There is something very wrong here, Hastings," he said. The crime. It is too theatrical. And yet, behind the theatre, there lies a very real hand. And whose hand might that be? I asked. Poirot's gaze flickered to the staircase above. That, mon ami, we shall soon discover. Colonel Marcus Whitlow received us in his study, a room as full of ego as it was memorabilia from his career in the army and his excavations in Egypt. The colonel himself was perched behind a massive oak desk, a glass of whiskey already in hand, despite the early hour. I trust you'll clear this nonsense up quickly, Poirot, he said briskly. These superstitious whispers. It's bad for the household, bad for morale. Poirot settled into a leather armchair with his usual precise elegance, while I took a seat beside him, notebook in hand. Colonel, Poirot began, you are a man of action, yes? You believe only what you can see and touch. Exactly. Whitlow slapped the desk. These stories about curses, rubbish, accidents, that's all. Richard was clumsy. Abel Mayhew probably drank more than he should have. And as for my wife, he paused, his jaw tightening. Helena was fragile, prone to fancies. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And yet, you brought these artifacts, knowing the stories that clung to them. Whitlow's bluster faltered slightly. They're priceless pieces, Poirot, worth a fortune to the right collector. You know what these private collectors pay for authentic relics. If anything, the rumours make them more valuable. People love a bit of drama. Poirot leaned forward, fingers steepled. And you yourself, have you ever experienced anything unusual connected to the artifacts? Of course not, Whitlow barked. I've handled them dozens of times. Nothing's ever happened to me. How fortunate, Poirot murmured. Yet others were not so lucky. Whitlow's face reddened. Look here, Poirot. If you're suggesting that I had anything to do with this… Poirot raised a hand. Calm yourself, mon colonel. Poirot only suggests what the facts reveal. And the facts, they are patient. They wait to speak. Well, you'll find no ghosts in this house, Whitlow said gruffly. Just a family with a bit of bad luck. Poirot rose. Luck, Colonel, is often the name we give to consequence we do not wish to see. As we left the study, I whispered to Poirot, Do you believe him? Poirot smiled faintly. Mon ami, it is not belief that concerns me. It is the eagerness with which a man dismisses his own fears. Miss Evelyn Whitlow was a woman who seemed to exist in a perpetual state of nervous anticipation, as though life itself were a series of unfortunate surprises waiting to pounce. She was seated in the small morning room, a thin shawl clutched around her narrow shoulders, despite the warmth of the day. Her hands twisted ceaselessly in her lap, and her sharp, bird-like eyes flitted about the room, landing everywhere but on Poirot. I knew it, she said the moment we entered. I knew something terrible would happen the moment Marcus brought those cursed things into the house. Poirot inclined his head slightly. Ah, mademoiselle, you believe very strongly in this curse, yes? Of course. Evelyn's hands clenched into fists. My grandmother always said, we Whitlows have no business meddling with ancient evils. And now look, Richard dead, poor Abel gone, and now Helena. Her voice faltered, and for a brief moment, her bravado gave way to genuine grief. Poirot eased into a chair opposite her. And you, mademoiselle, did you yourself ever see or hear anything strange? She hesitated, then nodded vigorously. I saw a figure outside the artifact room, late at night. It was a shadow, but it moved. It was there, I swear it. I shifted uncomfortably. There was something in her fervour that unsettled me, even though I hardly believed in curses or ghostly shadows. Poirot's expression, however, remained serenely neutral. A shadow, you say? And this shadow, did it resemble anyone you know? Evelyn paled slightly. I couldn't say, but I know it was connected to the curse. Poirot leaned forward slightly, his fingers tapping together in that infuriatingly methodical way of his. Tell me, mademoiselle, between you and me, What do you think of your brother's interest in these artifacts? Evelyn's expression darkened. Marcus has always been obsessed. Even when we were children, he was fascinated by dark histories, secret stories, things best left alone. I told Helena so many times, but she never listened. And the day Richard died, where were you, mademoiselle? She blinked rapidly. I was in my room. I heard the fall. I ran out after, but I never saw him fall. And on the night Lady Helena died. Evelyn's hands trembled. I couldn't sleep. I was walking the corridors. I saw the shadow again, just before Helena screamed. Poirot stood, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. Merci, mademoiselle. Your assistance. It is invaluable. As we left, I whispered, well, she's convinced, Poirot. Do you think she really saw something? Poirot's smile was faint. She saw what she wanted to see, mon ami. But what matters is not what she saw. It is why she saw it. Dr. Leopold Fincher was already waiting for us in the library, perched on the edge of a leather armchair like a man expecting bad news. He had the air of someone accustomed to guilt, even if only in his own mind. A thin, reedy man with perpetually damp hands, he rose awkwardly as we entered, nearly upsetting a small table of books in the process. Ah, mon docteur, Poirot said, ever polite. You are the man who knows the secrets of the body, yes? But perhaps today, you will help Poirot with the secrets of the mind. Fincher gave a thin smile that faded almost instantly. I'll do my best, of course. Poirot wasted no time. Doctor, you were present for both Richard Whitlow's death and Mr. Mayhew's drowning. Yes? Fincher's eyes darted to the window. Yes, I examined both bodies. And what did you conclude? Poirot's gaze never wavered. Accidents. Both of them, Fincher said, too quickly. Terrible accidents. Poirot's brows lifted ever so slightly. But you yourself warned Poirot about the curse. You believe in it. Fincher's thin fingers gripped the armrest. I believe that the artifacts unsettle people. Whether it's a curse or not, I can't say. But people act differently around them. Indeed, Poirot said softly. And you, mon docteur, have you ever handled these artifacts yourself? The doctor's reaction was immediate. A sharp intake of breath, followed by a frantic shake of the head. No, I keep well away from them. Yet, you were seen burning personal letters in the garden yesterday, Poirot continued smoothly. Letters connected to the artifacts, perhaps. Fincher's pallor deepened. They were private, debts I owed, gambling debts. He swallowed hard. Marcus helped me cover them years ago. I owed him my loyalty. And so you kept his secrets? Poirot asked gently. Fincher's hands trembled. I never meant to lie. Poirot raised a hand. Do not trouble yourself. Lies, they are like the bandages, no? They cover the wound, but they cannot heal it. As we stepped into the hall, I exhaled sharply. Well, that was painful to watch. He's hiding something, Poirot. Oui, Hastings, Poirot said. But fear, it is not always the fear of guilt. Sometimes it is simply the fear of what one might discover if one looks too closely. I shivered. The house seemed colder somehow. Mr. Gilbert Chalmers had the look of a man who had once been impressive and had since shrank within himself, the sort of scholar whose life had been spent more in dusty archives than under the desert sun. We found him seated by the library window, polishing his gold-rimmed spectacles with a handkerchief that had certainly seen cleaner days. As Poirot and I entered, Chalmers gave a dry chuckle. I suppose you've come to ask about Marcus's precious collection. Everyone always does. Poirot inclined his head graciously. Indeed, monsieur. The artifacts. They interest you also. Interest. Chalmers snorted. They infuriate me, Monsieur Poirot. Half of what Marcus owns shouldn't even be here. They were removed under circumstances that would make any reputable archaeologist blush. But Marcus, you see, has charm and connections. I glanced at Poirot, expecting one of his mild rebukes about professional jealousy, but my friend merely nodded thoughtfully. And you, monsieur? Poirot continued. Were you present at the excavation where these items were found? Chalmers's jaw tightened. I was. I was the lead archaeologist, in fact, until Marcus arrived with his flashy money and his insufferable certainty that everything belonged to him. And yet, Poirot said softly, you remain a guest in his house? Chalmers gave another of his bitter laughs. A guest? Hardly. I came to confront him about one particular piece, a golden funerary mask that went missing from the official inventory. I told him if he didn't return it to the Egyptian authorities, I'd expose him. And did you? Poirot asked. No, Chalmers admitted, slumping back in his chair. Because by the time I gathered my evidence, Richard Whitlow was dead, then Mayhew. Suddenly, Marcus was surrounded by whispers of a curse, and who would believe a bitter rival over a grieving man? Poirot's expression was unreadable. And on the night Lady Helena died, where were you, monsieur? In my room, Chalmers said, writing a letter of complaint to the Antiquities Society. You're welcome to see it, if Marcus hasn't burned it already. Poirot stood. Merci, monsieur. I may indeed trouble you for that letter. For now, the mind of Hercule Poirot must digest what you have shared. As we left the room, I whispered, that one's practically waving a flag, Poirot. Oui, Hastings, Poirot said. But is it the flag of guilt, or merely the flag of resentment? Time will tell. Mrs. Judith Pound was a woman of such unbending posture that I suspected she slept standing up. We found her in the housekeeper's parlour, a room so neat it seemed personally offended by our presence. Mrs. Pound, Poirot said with his usual courtly charm, may we trouble you for a few moments? Her expression suggested she had been troubled since birth and had simply learned to endure it. If it's about the curse, sir, I've nothing to say. I've served this house for 30 years, and I don't hold with that nonsense. Poirot smiled faintly. But you do believe, madame, in the influence of men upon each other's fate? Mrs. Pound's lips pressed into a thin line. I believe men bring their own misfortunes upon themselves and their wives. The slight emphasis on the last words was unmistakable. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, you speak of the late Lady Helena, yes? She was a gentle soul, Mrs. Pound said, a rare softness creeping into her voice. But she was no match for his obsessions. All that talk of tombs and treasures. She hated those artifacts, sir. Hated them. And you, madame? Poirot's tone was soft, almost coaxing. You too hated them. Mrs. Pound's hands knotted together. I feared them, what they did to this house. And yes, I hid one. That scarab brooch. I took it and locked it in the linen cupboard. Thought maybe if I removed just one, it would break the spell. She gave a dry laugh. Didn't work, did it? I was struck by the simple desperation in her voice, not fear of ancient spirits, but of what obsession could do to otherwise decent people. And on the night Lady Helena died, where were you, madame? Poirot asked. Mrs. Pound's gaze did not waver. In my room, praying. Praying, I repeated, surprised. For Lady Helena's soul, she said simply, and for the strength to keep my silence. Silence. Poirot's brows lifted. About what, madame? But Mrs. Pound's mouth clamped shut, and no force in heaven or earth or Belgium could pry another word from her. As we walked back to Poirot's room, I muttered, well, there's no shortage of motive in this house. Oui, Hastings, Poirot said, but motive alone, it is not enough. We must find the mind behind the curtain, pulling the strings. And do you have an idea who that might be? I asked. Poirot's moustache twitched. The little grey cells, they have begun to whisper. But whispering is not proof. Proof, mon ami, we shall soon uncover. The household at Château de Lille, already on edge, seemed to crackle with tension as Poirot's investigation unfolded. Each corridor and shadow held the weight of whispered fears, and the servants exchanged nervous glances whenever Poirot's polished shoes tapped across the marble floors. The first red herring arrived courtesy of Miss Evelyn Whitlow, who burst into the morning room with the air of a woman carrying news too dreadful to keep. "I saw it again," she cried, her fingers twisting together like knotted string. The shadowy figure, outside the artifact room, standing perfectly still, watching. And then, gone. Hastings, who had taken to keeping a careful record of these sightings, muttered, "This house is more crowded with ghosts than guests." Poirot, however, merely raised an elegant brow. "A shadow, mademoiselle, tells us little. It has no voice, no mind. It is merely the reflection of something real." Yet even I felt an involuntary shiver at the idea. That afternoon, Dr. Fincher added to the intrigue when a maid found him in the garden, burning a bundle of papers with a guilty expression. Poirot retrieved a half-charred scrap, just enough to glimpse a sum of money owed to Marcus Whitlow, along with the doctor's signature. A man indebted to his host and fearful enough to destroy the evidence. It was hardly reassuring, but the strangest revelation came from Mrs. Pound, who summoned Poirot to the linen cupboard and with trembling hands produced a small artifact wrapped in muslin. "I took it, sir," she admitted. "I thought if I removed just one cursed piece, it might break the spell on this house." Poirot's response was a gentle smile. "Superstition, madam. It is a comforting veil. But Poirot, he prefers to see the truth." Yet even I could not deny. The air felt heavier that day. That evening, Poirot sat at his desk, the house unnervingly quiet around him. Before him lay a thin folder, the contents gathered from the rooms of both Richard Whitlow and Abel Mayhew, the two unfortunate men who had died before Lady Helena. With the tip of his immaculate finger, Poirot traced the edge of a small slip of paper, retrieved from Richard's belongings. Its surface was coarse, unmistakably papyrus, ancient and brittle. The ink faded, but legible. "Return what was taken, or the curse will take you." A near-identical note, though slightly crumpled, had been found tucked into Mayhew's account ledger. Poirot's fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Curious, mon ami," Poirot said softly. "A curse that prefers stationery of historical accuracy. It is very polite for a vengeful spirit." I leaned closer, frowning at the ancient script. "That's Egyptian papyrus, isn't it?" "Exactement," Poirot confirmed. "And who, Hastings, within this house, would possess both the access and the knowledge to acquire such paper?" Suddenly, the collection of scholars, Egyptologists, and obsessive collectors under this roof seemed a great deal more suspicious. Poirot smiled, but his eyes were sharp. "The curse, Hastings, it begins to speak, not in whispers, but in the very human language of deceit." The following morning, Poirot took command of the morning room, transforming it into his personal theatre of truth, as he called it. Each suspect was summoned one by one, with Poirot positioned like a magistrate presiding over a peculiar court, his small, fastidious frame radiating quiet authority. I had taken a seat near the window, notebook in hand, though I suspected Poirot would remember every word without the slightest need for my scribblings. "Mon ami," he said to me softly before the first suspect entered. The true detective does not only listen to what is said, no, he listens to what is not said. I nodded solemnly, though I wasn't entirely sure I grasped his meaning. Poirot's conversations, after all, had a habit of circling round in ever smaller loops, until somehow they arrived at the very heart of the matter. Colonel Marcus Whitlow was first. He took the chair with the air of a man who had been thoroughly inconvenienced and was determined to let everyone know. Poirot questioned him about the timeline of the deaths, the artifacts, and his knowledge of the curse. The colonel's responses were brisk, practical, and too practiced, if you ask me. When Whitlow stormed out, Poirot merely smiled. "The man of action," he murmured. "He believes that speed can outrun the truth. He is mistaken." Dr. Fincher followed, his nervous fingers clutching a handkerchief that he twisted like a rope. His answers were stammered, vague at times, but Poirot's gentle persistence drew out inconsistencies, small ones, but each one a thread. Next came Chalmers, the Egyptologist, who bristled with professional indignation every time Marcus's name was mentioned. His disdain for his host was evident, but Poirot's questions led him down unexpected paths, particularly regarding the missing funerary mask that had caused so much bitterness. Mrs. Pound followed, stiff as a poker, her eyes hard. Poirot's soft tone gradually softened her in return, until she admitted to hiding the artifact, her fear and superstitions woven through her every word. Finally, Miss Evelyn Whitlow entered, already trembling before the questioning had begun. Poirot folded his hands. "Mademoiselle, shall we speak of shadows?" Evelyn sat perched on the very edge of the armchair, wringing her handkerchief until it resembled a tattered rag. Her eyes darted about the room, landing everywhere but on Poirot himself, as though the little man's gaze might unravel her secrets like an untidy seam. "Now, mademoiselle," Poirot began, "this shadow you saw near the artifact room, describe it to me, if you please." Evelyn licked her lips nervously. "It was tall, very tall, and it stood so still, as though it knew I was watching. And this shadow, it appeared how many times?" Poirot's voice was gentle, almost fatherly. "Twice," Evelyn said, voice trembling. "The night Richard died, and again, the night Helena." Her voice caught. "It was the curse." There was a delicate silence. Poirot folded his hands neatly in his lap. "Mademoiselle, you believe this, I do not doubt. But tell me, when you saw the shadow, were you quite alone?" Evelyn hesitated, a fraction too long. Poirot's smile was almost tender. "You were not alone, were you?" Her breath came faster. "It was just a little trick. A harmless trick. I thought, if Marcus could see the curse with his own eyes, he might send those awful things away." "You staged it," I blurted, astonished. "You created the shadow." Evelyn nodded, wringing her hands. "A lantern, Captain Hastings, and a figure I cast against the wall using one of Helena's cloaks. I thought it would scare Marcus into returning the artifacts. And instead," Poirot said softly, "the curse became real. Not through ancient spirits, but through the fear you helped create." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes. "I never meant for anyone to die." Poirot's expression was unreadable, but I knew his sympathy was tempered with judgment. "Fear, mademoiselle, it is a dangerous thing. Once released, it is no longer yours to control." She burst into sobs, and Poirot rose, patting her shoulder, with a gentleness that always surprised me in a man so meticulous. "Dry your eyes, mademoiselle. The true killer, they are not a shadow. They are very much flesh and blood. And they are afraid too. Afraid that Hercule Poirot now knows the shape of their crime." As Evelyn left, Poirot gave me that mysterious little smile of his. "You see, Hastings? Sometimes the shadow tells the truth after all." It was after luncheon that Mr. Gilbert Chalmers was summoned once more to Poirot's ever-shrinking circle of truth. The Egyptologist entered the study with the air of a man who had resigned himself to the firing squad, his shoulders stiff, his mouth a thin, defensive line. "Mr. Chalmers," Poirot began smoothly, "there is something you have not told Poirot. About the permits." Chalmers' jaw twitched. "Permits? Oui." Poirot's fingertips met delicately beneath his chin. "The permits allowing the removal of certain artifacts from the excavation site in Saqqara. They are not, shall we say, strictly authentic." Chalmers' colour rose sharply. "I didn't forge them for my own gain," he snapped. "Marcus pressured me. He wanted certain pieces out of Egypt quietly, before the authorities could claim them. He said it was just expedient." "And you agreed," Poirot said softly, "because you feared losing your position?" Chalmers' nostrils flared. "You don't understand what it's like, Monsieur Poirot. When a man like Marcus Whitlow decides you are in his way, your career can vanish overnight. I did what I had to do." Ah, Poirot murmured, the little compromises. They pile up like the sands of the desert, until one day, mon cher, they become a dune that buries you alive. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of sympathy for Chalmers, though I confess his bitterness was hardly endearing. And after Richard died? Poirot pressed. You knew, did you not, that Marcus might soon have no need for you at all? Chalmers gave a bleak laugh. That's when I decided to fight back. I threatened to expose the forgeries. I even drafted a letter to the Antiquities Society. Poirot's head tilted. Drafted, but not sent. Chalmers' gaze flickered to the window. I never got the chance. Helena died that same night. And after that, the curse story became bigger than the truth. Poirot rose, brushing a stray crumb from his sleeve. Merci, monsieur. Your honesty. It comes late, but it comes. And as Poirot always says, better late than never, unless, of course, you are a train. As Chalmers departed, I whispered, What do you think, Poirot? Poirot gave his enigmatic smile. A man who falsifies the past, Hastings, will often falsify the present. But whether he is a forger or a killer, that is a question still unanswered. Dr. Leopold Fincher was next, looking even more fragile than before, his fingers stained with ink and trembling slightly as he lowered himself into the chair opposite Poirot. Doctor, Poirot began, his voice almost soothing. You were seen yesterday in the garden, burning letters, yes? Fincher's mouth opened and closed like a startled fish. Old correspondence, nothing important. Poirot's brows lifted. Ah, but the ashes, they disagree with you. Among the fragments, Poirot saw a bank's letterhead, oui, and numbers, very large numbers. Fincher's gaze dropped to his lap. It was debt, he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. I owed money, a great deal. Marcus, he helped me once. He paid off some of it in return for my silence about certain health matters within the family. Ah! Poirot's eyes gleamed. Health matters, or secrets. Fincher's hands twisted together. Richard, he had a weak heart. The fall might not have been as accidental as Marcus claimed. And Abel Mayhew, he'd been talking about a revised will for Lady Helena, one that would change the disposition of the artifacts after Marcus's death. Marcus was furious. And you, mon cher docteur, Poirot said gently. You knew all this, and you said nothing. Fincher's pale face flushed with guilt. I thought it was family quarrels, nothing more. And then the death started. Poirot leaned forward, his voice low. And you, mon docteur, did you ever wonder if perhaps Marcus's generosity in paying your debts was an investment, not a kindness? Fincher swallowed hard. I didn't kill anyone, Monsieur Poirot. I'm a coward, yes. I kept quiet when I should have spoken. But I'm no murderer. Poirot's smile was faint. Cowardice, it is not a crime, but silence. Ah, silence can be fatal. As Fincher stumbled out, visibly shaken, I leaned toward Poirot. Well, he's hardly the criminal mastermind type, is he? Non, Hastings, Poirot said. But remember, a secret kept is a debt unpaid. And sometimes, when the time comes to collect, the price is death. Of all the household, Mrs. Judith Pound was the one I felt most uneasy around. There was something in her unwavering posture, in the way she folded her hands like a judge about to pronounce sentence, that made me feel as though I had committed a crime just by standing in the same room. Poirot, however, approached her with his most disarming smile, all continental charm. Madame Pound, you have been the housekeeper here for many years, yes? You knew the late Lady Helena well. Her mouth tightened into a thin line. I knew her from the day she married Colonel Whitlow. And you were fond of her? Mrs. Pound's fingers twitched slightly, the only crack in her otherwise impenetrable facade. She deserved better, she said at last. That woman had a gentle spirit, too gentle to survive this house. Poirot's brows lifted. This house, or its master? There was a silence so heavy I could feel it pressing down on the room. He brought those cursed things into her home, Mrs. Pound said quietly. Helena hated them, said they brought a sickness into the air, and Marcus, he wouldn't listen. He never listened. And so you, Madame, Poirot's voice softened. You tried to protect her in the only way you knew. You hid one of the artifacts. Her gaze flicked sharply toward Poirot, but there was no point in denying it. I thought if one piece went missing, if the collection wasn't whole, it might break the spell. Superstition, I muttered, though in truth I felt a small twinge of sympathy for her desperate gesture. Superstition, Poirot agreed, but born of something deeper. Resentment, perhaps. Mrs. Pound's hands clenched into fists. He was a selfish, arrogant man, Mr. Poirot. He ruined Lady Helena's peace of mind. And now, look what's happened. Poirot inclined his head. Madame, the loyalty you had for Lady Helena, it is admirable. But loyalty, like love, it can blind even the clearest of eyes. Her face was pale, but she said nothing more. As we stepped out into the hall, I whispered, well, if she didn't kill him, she probably wanted to. Ah, Hastings, Poirot said, with a faint smile. There is no crime in hatred, but it makes a most useful disguise for other sins. It was at this point that Poirot gathered all the fragments of the investigation, like a man assembling a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Each suspect had offered their story. Each story seemed, on its own, plausible enough. And yet, when placed side by side, none of them fit. Poirot began with Colonel Marcus Whitlow, who insisted that on the nights of each tragedy, Richard's fall, Mayhew's drowning, and Helena's collapse, he had been in the company of his sister, Evelyn. When Poirot asked Evelyn to confirm this, her hands trembled violently. No, she stammered. I was alone each time. I couldn't bear Marcus talking about those wretched artifacts again, so I went to my room. Curious, Poirot said softly. So, mon colonel, it seems your alibi, it vanishes like the mist. Marcus turned a deep shade of red but said nothing. Next came Mr. Chalmers, who claimed to have retired early on the night of Lady Helena's death. However, Poirot had already obtained a most interesting piece of evidence, Chalmers' shoes, which bore traces of mud from the ornamental pond path, mud that could only have been gathered after the rain which fell after dinner. But I only stepped outside for a smoke, Chalmers protested. Poirot's smile was faint. Perhaps. Or perhaps, monsieur, you were watching, as well as smoking. Mrs. Pound's story was the thinnest of all. She had claimed to be praying in her room on the night of Lady Helena's death. Yet none of the servants had seen her enter her room until well after the commotion. And Poirot, ever meticulous, had found a small smear of wax from a candle in the linen cupboard, where she had hidden the artifact. Your prayers, madame, Poirot said gently, took you a most circuitous route. Finally, there was Dr. Fincher, whose alibi was the weakest. He claimed to have spent the evening in his room writing letters. Yet when Poirot asked to see his blotting paper, it was clean, too clean for a man who had supposedly been drafting personal correspondence. My letters were private, Fincher protested. Ah, Poirot raised a finger. But the ink, mon docteur, it does not lie. You wrote nothing that night. It was a masterclass in Poirot's particular genius. He hadn't needed physical evidence in the traditional sense. He needed only the contradictions, the tiny cracks between one story and the next. By the end, every alibi had crumbled into dust. Mon ami, Poirot said to me as the suspects were dismissed, each of them shaken and uncertain. You see now why Poirot always insists, the truth, it does not hide in objects, but in the words men speak when they think they are clever. I could only shake my head in admiration. You've dismantled every story they told. Non, Hastings, Poirot said, eyes twinkling. I have simply swept away the fog. What remains? Ah, that is where the true story begins. By the time the interviews concluded, my mind felt like a tangled fishing line, knotted with contradictions, loose ends, and strange half-confessions that seemed to lead nowhere. I followed Poirot back to his room, half expecting him to launch into one of his triumphant explanations. Instead, he sat by the fire, methodically straightening the tassels of a cushion. "Poirot," I began, pacing in front of the hearth. "I can't make head or tail of it. Every story contradicts the next. Alibis vanish, clues appear and disappear, and no one seems to be where they claim at the crucial moment. It's—" I broke off, running a hand through my hair. "It's unnatural." Poirot glanced up, his eyes half amused. "Innaturel, mon ami." "Well, look at it!" I exploded. Richard fell down the stairs with no one nearby. Mayhew drowned in a pond without a struggle. And Helena, she died clutching that infernal amulet as though the thing itself reached out and strangled her. What other explanation can there be but— I faltered, reluctant to say the word aloud. Poirot, however, said it for me. "The curse, Hastings." I felt foolish, but I could hardly deny the chill crawling down my spine. "You must admit, Poirot, there's something uncanny about it all. Everything points to that collection." Every death Poirot gave a tiny sigh and shook his head, his moustache quivering with faint disapproval. "Mon cher Hastings, you are like the child who sees shadows at bedtime and believes them to be monsters." "Well, can you explain it all logically then?" I demanded. For once, Poirot offered no immediate lecture. Instead, he only smiled, infuriatingly serene. "Patience, mon ami. Sometimes the truth waits until all the players have left the stage." We were dressing for dinner when Poirot offered one of his maddeningly vague remarks. He stood at the mirror, adjusting his tie with the care of a jeweller setting a diamond. "Hastings," he said, "what is it that men fear most in all the world?" "Death," I said promptly. "Ah, you see, so simple." He gave his tie a final pat. "And yet, mon ami, not death itself. Non. They fear the discovery of their own crimes, because that, mon ami, is the death of their carefully built lies." I stared at him in confusion. "Are you saying someone staged the curse to hide a crime?" Poirot turned to me with a radiant smile. "Hastings, you have the gift of seeing the obvious and being astonished by it. Bravo." "But who—" Poirot held up a finger. "Non, non, not yet. The curtain has not yet fallen. But soon, mon ami, very soon, the little grey cells shall take their final bow." With that, he slipped his pocket watch into his waistcoat and strolled to dinner as though murder was nothing more than an elaborate game. It was precisely 9 o'clock when Hercule Poirot swept into the grand hall of Château d'Elie, his patent leather shoes gleaming and his moustache combed to perfection, like a general preparing to command his troops. Hastings, ever the loyal lieutenant, stood to one side, notebook clutched in his hand, though his notes had long since devolved into a series of frustrated scribbles. The suspects, Colonel Marcus Whitlow, Evelyn Whitlow, Dr. Fincher, Mr. Chalmers, and Mrs. Pound, were already assembled, perched uneasily on the velvet chairs arranged in a semicircle. The air was thick with nervous anticipation, the kind that precedes either a confession or an explosion. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice carrying with effortless authority, "we have come to the end of our little drama. The time has come for the truth to step into the light and for the shadows to disappear." His gaze swept across the room like a searchlight, pausing briefly on each face. "You have all believed to some degree in the curse of the artifacts, a curse that we are told has claimed 3 lives. But, mes amis, I must tell you something most shocking." He paused, savouring the silence. "There is no curse." Evelyn gasped. Mrs. Pound made the sign of the cross. Marcus scoffed, though his knuckles whitened against the arm of his chair. The deaths of Richard Whitlow, Mr. Mayhew, and Lady Helena, each one was not the work of ancient gods, but of a very modern mind, a mind that understood one great truth. Poirot raised a finger. "Fear, my friends, is the most reliable accomplice of all." He stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back. You see, the curse was a curtain, and behind that curtain stood a murderer, very much alive, very much human, and very much among us. For a moment, no one breathed. And then, with a small, theatrical bow, Poirot announced, "But before I reveal the hand that struck the fatal blow, there is another deception, a smaller one, but no less important, that must first come to light." His gaze landed squarely on Miss Evelyn Whitlow. Evelyn's hands flew to her throat, her face as pale as the marble statue beside her. "Me?" she stammered. "What could I possibly—" "Ah, mademoiselle," Poirot said gently, "let us not play the innocent lamb. You see, it was you who first gave life to the legend of the shadowy figure haunting the artifact room. It was you who claimed to have seen a curse walking on two legs." Evelyn's gaze darted to her brother, then to the floor. I only wanted to frighten Marcus," she whispered. "Just so," Poirot nodded. "But you did not stop with mere whispers. No, mademoiselle, you took a lantern, a cloak, and the ancient gift of imagination, and you created the ghost." There was a collective intake of breath. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "I thought if Marcus believed the artifacts were truly cursed, he would return them. Send them back where they belonged." "A noble motive," Poirot acknowledged. "But alas, mademoiselle, the road to tragedy is paved with good intentions and bad theatre." "What do you mean?" Evelyn whispered. Poirot's expression grew sombre. "Your staged shadow was seen by more than just your brother. It was seen by a mind already poised to kill, a mind that realized this false curse could become a perfect cover for murder." Evelyn's hands shook violently. "You mean because of me?" "Non," Poirot interrupted. "The guilt for murder belongs only to the murderer. But your little deception, mademoiselle, it gave him his stage." Evelyn dissolved into sobs, and Poirot gave a small, sad sigh. "You wished to protect your family, mademoiselle. Instead, you gave the murderer the perfect alibi, the invisible hand of an ancient curse." Marcus rose abruptly, face red with anger. "You mean to say this whole cursed charade was just Evelyn playing ghost?" "Exactement," Poirot said. "But do not fear, mon colonel. The real killer's performance is about to reach its final act." He turned toward the rest of the assembled party, his eyes gleaming. "And now, mes amis, the curtain shall rise, for the murderer has been among us from the very beginning." Mrs. Pound sat as still as a statue carved from granite, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles shone like polished ivory. Poirot's gaze rested upon her with something almost like kindness, though I knew better than to mistake it for sentimentality. "Madame," Poirot began, "you have served this house with loyalty beyond reason. Your devotion to Lady Helena was not merely that of a housekeeper, but of a guardian. Oui, a guardian who saw her mistress's suffering and took matters into her own hands." Mrs. Pound's lips pressed together, but her eyes flickered. Poirot had struck true. "On the night Lady Helena died, you were not, as you claimed, praying in your room." Poirot stepped closer, hands neatly clasped behind his back. "You were in the linen cupboard, removing and hiding one of the artifacts." A soft gasp rippled through the assembled guests, but Mrs. Pound's face remained stony. "Why?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "Why steal a worthless trinket after your mistress had already died?" Poirot lifted a finger. "Ah, Hastings. But it was not worthless to Mrs. Pound. To her, it was evidence. She believed the artifact itself, the cursed object, was to blame for Lady Helena's death." A faint tremor shook Mrs. Pound's hands, but she said nothing. "Non, madame," Poirot continued, his voice gentler now. "You did not steal to profit. You stole to protect. You feared that if the truth came out, that Lady Helena had handled the artifact willingly, people would say she had brought the curse upon herself. You wanted her memory to remain blameless." A soft sigh escaped Mrs. Pound's lips. She was so frightened, Mr. Poirot. She hated those things. But that night, she held the amulet like it was her only hope. I couldn't bear the thought that anyone would say she invited her own death. Poirot gave a small bow of respect. Your loyalty, madame, it is touching. But in protecting her memory, you almost obscured the truth. Mrs. Pound lowered her head, and for the first time, I saw tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. As we left her to her grief, Poirot murmured to me, "Loyalty, Hastings. It can be the noblest of virtues or the most dangerous of blindfolds." Dr. Fincher was perched awkwardly at the edge of his chair, his fingers working anxiously at the brim of his hat. He had the look of a man expecting the firing squad, and I confess, given his erratic behaviour, I too had long suspected him. Poirot, however, seemed almost playful as he addressed him. "Mon docteur," Poirot said, "you have trembled and sweated through every step of this investigation. But let me reassure you, you are no murderer." Fincher blinked rapidly. I'm not?" "Non," Poirot said firmly. "You are many things. A man of fragile nerves, a poor player of cards, and perhaps even a fool for trusting Colonel Whitlow with your secrets, but you are no killer." Fincher's sigh of relief was almost comical. "Your behaviour, it was suspicious, oui," Poirot continued. "Burning letters, lurking in gardens, trembling at every question. But all of it, every shadow you cast, was born not of guilt, but of shame." Fincher's gaze dropped to his shoes. "It's true. I'm a hopeless gambler. And Marcus, he bailed me out once, paid off some particularly nasty debts in Cairo. In return, I promised to keep quiet." "About his health?" I asked. "About Helena's health," Fincher corrected softly. "She suffered from a weak heart, something Marcus never wanted public. He thought it would tarnish her reputation, or worse, reduce her value in society." Poirot's moustache twitched with disgust. "A man who treats his wife as an investment. It is very ugly, mon ami." Fincher's shoulders sagged. "After Richard and Mayhew died, I was terrified. I thought Marcus might try to pin the blame on me. That's why I burned my old letters, the ones proving how much I owed him." "And in doing so," Poirot said gently, "you made yourself appear more guilty, not less." "I didn't kill anyone," Fincher repeated. "I swear it." "Oui," Poirot said, "and for once, you speak the truth." I could not help but feel a pang of sympathy for the man. He was at best a weakling, but weaklings are rarely murderers. As we left Fincher behind, Poirot turned to me with a small smile. "You see, Hastings, sometimes the guilty face is only the mask worn by the truly frightened." A hush fell over the grand hall as Poirot took his place at the head of the room, his small frame, almost comically out of place among the heavily carved furniture and sombre portraits, nevertheless commanded absolute attention. His hands rested lightly on the back of a high-backed chair, his fingers steepled in thought. "Mes amis," he began, "the time has come to reveal the true villain of this tragedy, a man who has, from the very first moment, played his part with great confidence and bluster, hiding his guilt behind loud protestations and a convenient curse." I leaned forward, almost forgetting to breathe. Across from me, Colonel Marcus Whitlow sat with his arms crossed tightly over his chest, a faint sneer curling at the corner of his mouth. Poirot's gaze settled on him with almost paternal regret. "It is you, mon colonel. You are the killer." A collective gasp filled the room. Marcus leapt to his feet, face reddening. "That's absurd. I'm the victim here. The curse targeted my family." "Ah!" Poirot held up a finger. "But you see, mon colonel, there was no curse. There was only you and your obsession." "Obsession? What nonsense!" Marcus barked. "Non," Poirot said, his voice quiet but sharp. "It was your obsession with the artifacts, was it not, that led you to steal from the excavation? Your obsession that made you forge permits and silence objections. And when your own cousin, Richard Whitlow, began to question your rightful claim, that same obsession led you to push him down the stairs." "Ridiculous," Marcus spat. That was an accident. Non, mon colonel. It was calculated. A fall from that particular landing, with no witnesses, too perfect for chance. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And when your solicitor, Abel Mayhew, discovered that Lady Helena intended to revise her will, leaving the artifacts to the British Museum, you realized he too must die. This is slander, Marcus shouted. Is it? Poirot's smile was thin. You ensured Mayhew's accidental drowning, counting on the curse to cover your crime. And when Helena herself became too fearful, too determined to rid the house of the collection, you realized your wife must share their fate. Marcus's face had turned a sickly shade of grey. You can't prove any of this. Ah, mon colonel, Poirot's finger wagged gently. You made only one mistake. You replaced the amulet in its display case upside down, a detail only the killer would have known, for only the killer retrieved it after Helena's death. Marcus's silence was louder than any confession. Poirot straightened his cuffs. Hercule Poirot, he does not accuse without proof. The room seemed to exhale after Poirot's pronouncement, but he was not finished. With his characteristic flair for drama, Poirot gestured for everyone to remain seated. Let us, for the benefit of clarity, reconstruct the mind of the murderer, Poirot said, pacing before the fireplace like a professor addressing a lecture hall. For every crime, mes amis, there must be a motive, and for our colonel, the motive was always the same: possession. He turned sharply toward Marcus. You desired the artifacts not for their historical value, but for the power they gave you. They made you a figure of importance, a man with secrets no one else could possess. Rubbish, Marcus muttered, though there was no conviction in his voice. Richard, Poirot continued, was the first obstacle. A practical man, oui, but one who began to suspect that the collection was obtained illegally. He was going to raise the matter publicly, was he not? Marcus's silence spoke volumes. Then came Mr. Mayhew, the unfortunate solicitor. When Lady Helena confided her desire to alter her will, he became a danger. If the artifacts were removed from your possession, mon colonel, you would lose not just treasure, but your very identity. Poirot's fingers drummed the back of the chair. And then, of course, Helena herself. Your wife, who had once indulged your passions, now saw them as poisonous. She wanted the collection gone, and with it, your sense of self. Poirot's voice softened, almost pitying. You loved your artifacts more than you loved your wife, and when she threatened to take them from you, you did not hesitate. That's a lie, Marcus shouted, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. I cared for Helena more than anyone. Non, Poirot said simply, for the true love of your life, mon colonel, was always gold and stone. Marcus's shoulders sagged as though the weight of the truth had physically descended upon him. And so, Poirot concluded, each murder served a single cause: to keep your precious collection intact. Richard for asking too many questions, Mayhew for facilitating its removal, and poor Lady Helena because she stood between you and your obsession. Poirot's eyes, so often filled with warmth and humour, were now as cold as the Nile at midnight. It was never the curse, mon colonel. It was always you. Hastings exhaled sharply beside me. A man willing to kill his own wife, Poirot. What kind of monster does that? Poirot's voice was soft. Not a monster, mon ami. Simply a man who loved the wrong thing too much. The silence in the grand hall was thick as fog. Colonel Marcus Whitlow sat pale and motionless, his defiant bluster now replaced by the haunted stillness of a man whose fortress has crumbled around him. Poirot, ever the consummate dramatist, waited until the room had fully absorbed the shock before proceeding. Now, Poirot began, stepping into the centre of the room, you shall hear how it was done, for it is not enough, mes amis, to accuse. Poirot must also demonstrate the means. He clasped his hands behind his back, his steps measured as he walked between the seated suspects. The death of Richard Whitlow, it was the simplest of the three. Montcolonel arranged for Richard to meet him on the landing, under the pretext of discussing the revised inventory of the artifacts. There, a small conversation, perhaps an argument, and when Richard turned his back, a push, not hard, but just enough. Richard, with his weak heart, lost his balance, and the staircase did the rest. Mrs. Pound gave a muffled gasp. Marcus stared at the floor. Poirot's voice, smooth as polished marble, continued. Next, we have poor Mr. Abel Mayhew, a man who knew too much. That evening, Montcolonel asked Mayhew to walk with him by the ornamental pond to discuss Lady Helena's wishes for the will. Once alone, it was a simple matter to wait until Mayhew stood near the edge, and then, with a swift shove, the man was in the water. But surely Mayhew could swim, I asked. Ah, Hastings. Poirot wagged a finger. A weak swimmer, fully clothed, surprised by the fall, and perhaps mon ami, the colonel's hand remained on his shoulder just long enough to ensure no recovery. There was a horrified silence. And then, Poirot continued softly, the cruelest crime of all, the death of Lady Helena. This, mes amis, was not brute force, but subtlety. Marcus placed the amulet in her chamber, a talisman she feared and yet could not resist. But he had prepared the amulet beforehand, coated its surface with a rare toxin derived from ancient embalming practices. Good heavens, I exclaimed. So when she touched it— Exactement, Poirot nodded. Absorbed through the skin, disguised by the legends of the curse, it was not the hand of Anubis that struck her down, but the hand of her own husband. The room sat stunned, the horror of such cold calculation sinking in. Poirot folded his hands. Murder, mes amis, it requires a mind most precise, and a heart most empty. For a moment, after Poirot's damning final words, there was only silence, the kind of silence that hangs in the air just before a storm breaks. All eyes were on Colonel Marcus Whitlow, who sat slumped in his chair, staring at the carpet as though it might swallow him whole. It was Mrs. Pound who broke the silence, her voice trembling with fury and grief. You killed her. You killed Lady Helena. At that, Marcus's head snapped up, and suddenly the colonel was on his feet, his face flushed, his hands trembling with a mix of rage and something perilously close to madness. I did what I had to do. His voice rang out, startling us all. What did any of you understand? What did Helena understand? Those artifacts, they aren't just trinkets. They are history itself, fragments of a civilization that shaped the world. And I am their protector. You were their thief, said Chalmers coldly. Marcus turned on him with wild eyes, spittle gathering at the corner of his mouth. You call me a thief? You bureaucratic jackals would have buried them in museum basements where no one would ever feel their power. I saved them. I gave them a home. Poirot's voice was calm but cutting. And in saving them, Montcolonel, you destroyed everything else. Marcus's fists clenched. Richard was weak, always questioning, always fussing over ethics. Abel Mayhew was a coward, happy to rewrite Helena's will if it paid him enough. And Helena never understood. She hated the artifacts because she was too small-minded to see their beauty. He whirled to face Evelyn. And you, pale little Evelyn, your ghost games nearly ruined everything. If you hadn't fed that ridiculous curse nonsense, I could have explained everything, rationally. Evelyn shrank back in her chair, eyes wide with horror. But you see, Montcolonel, Poirot said softly, it was the curse, the lie you embraced, that allowed your crimes to succeed. Your greed, your vanity, they wore the mask of ancient fear. Marcus gave a bark of laughter that had nothing of humour in it. And yet you caught me, a foreigner with a ridiculous moustache. Poirot bowed slightly. Hercule Poirot, at your service. With that, Marcus sank back into his chair, the fight draining from his body. His obsession had consumed everything, and now there was nothing left. With Marcus slumped in his chair, Poirot smoothed his cuffs and turned to the assembled room. Now, mes amis, allow me to explain how the little grey cells arrived at the truth. Hastings, ever my faithful chronicler, leaned forward with his pencil poised, for this was Poirot in his finest hour. It began, Poirot said, with the curse itself. Always, it is a warning when the guilty man insists too loudly that he does not believe in superstitions. Our colonel, he protested too much. He began to pace, his hands clasped behind his back. And then there were the victims, each one tied not simply to the household, but directly to the fate of the artifacts. Richard, the practical man, who knew too much. Mayhew, the solicitor, who could change the will. And poor Lady Helena, who wanted the collection removed entirely. Poirot's eyes gleamed. 3 deaths, each tied not to a family curse, but to a man's obsessive desire to possess. But how did you know it was Marcus? I asked. Ah, mon ami, you must think with logic, not emotion. Poirot wagged his finger. First there was the amulet itself, placed back into its case after Helena's death, but upside down. That tells Poirot one thing. It was replaced in haste, by a man more concerned with hiding his crime than with respecting the artifact. I nodded slowly. And the poison? Poirot's moustache twitched proudly. A rare embalming compound known only to experts in ancient burial rites, a knowledge shared by precisely 2 people in this house, Mr. Chalmers and Colonel Marcus Whitlow. Chalmers made a choking noise, but Poirot held up his hand. Non, monsieur, you are many things, bitter, resentful, but you are not a killer. You would destroy Marcus with a letter to the Antiquities Board, not with murder. Poirot turned back to Marcus. And lastly, there was the psychology. The killer was not driven by money, nor by revenge, but by possession. Only Marcus had that fanatical passion, the belief that the artifacts were his destiny. Poirot smiled gently. The method, it was clever, oui. But the mind behind it, that was tragically simple. Greed, mon colonel. Greed disguised as devotion. I exhaled slowly. You saw all that, from upside-down jewellery and a bit of papyrus. Poirot's chest swelled with pride. Mon ami, the truth is always written, if one knows how to read the story. As Poirot delivered his final stroke, the room fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire. I turned to my friend, half expecting him to settle into his chair, smugly satisfied. Instead, Poirot was adjusting the crease in his trousers with delicate precision, as though he had merely completed a particularly mundane errand. Poirot, I said, leaning toward him. This is incredible, even for you. I still cannot quite believe it. All these deaths, Richard, Mayhew, poor Lady Helena, all of it, nothing but greed. Poirot gave me a look of profound patience, the sort a schoolmaster reserves for a particularly slow pupil. Mon ami, he said, it is always greed, or its cousin, fear. Men kill for many reasons, oui, but almost always it is to possess something or to hide something. Yes, but the curse, I began. Poirot's moustache gave a magnificent twitch. Ah, the curse. The poor, convenient curse. A useful fiction, as so many curses are. You, Hastings, you were enchanted by it. Your imagination, it runs too fast. Well, you must admit it was all very strange. Shadowy figures, ancient warnings, people dropping like flies. Poirot shook his head, his expression one of mock sorrow. Mon cher Hastings, you saw too much and too little at the same time. The truth, it was always simple. A man who could not bear to part with his treasures. A man who used the oldest trick in history, fear of the unknown, to hide the most ordinary crime. I exhaled slowly. It's dashed unsettling, Poirot, to think Marcus was dining with us, smiling at his own cleverness, even as Lady Helena lay dead. C'est la vie, mon ami. Poirot said with a small shrug. Men lie at the table as easily as they breathe. As the guests began to disperse, Poirot held up a hand, stopping them in their tracks. "One last thing," he said, his voice light but deliberate. "The amulet." Colonel Marcus, still pale but composed, gave a bitter laugh. "What about it?" Poirot stepped forward, producing a small notebook from his pocket. "When I examined it after Lady Helena's death, I noticed something most curious. The amulet, which was said to hold such great power, had been returned to its display case, but upside down." Hastings frowned. "What does that prove?" Poirot smiled, almost indulgently. "It proves, mon ami, that the person who placed it there was not the grieving widow or a fearful servant. It was the murderer himself, who replaced it in haste, concerned only with hiding the evidence, not with honoring its so-called power." He snapped the notebook shut. "The final touch of carelessness, mon ami. As always, it is the small detail that betrays the greatest crime." Marcus gave no reply. His silence, at last, was complete confession. Later that evening, as Poirot and I packed our bags, I could not resist asking, "Poirot, how did you see it so clearly when the rest of us were fumbling in the dark?" Poirot paused, carefully folding a pair of gloves. "Because, Hastings, one must always dig beneath the surface, whether one is an archaeologist or a detective." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that your final wisdom for this case?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Not quite. You see, mon ami, archaeology is the art of uncovering the past, but crime is the art of concealing the present." I couldn't help but smile. "And Hercule Poirot?" Poirot straightened his tie one final time. "Hercule Poirot? He does not dig like the archaeologist. Non, he peels away the lies, layer by layer, until only the truth remains, shining like a perfectly polished gem." With that, he snapped his valise shut and gave me his most magnificent bow. "And now, mon ami, it is time for us to depart this house of curses and leave its ghosts to the historians." As the evening drew to a close and the grand halls of Château de Lille faded into silence, one truth remained crystal clear. In the world of Hercule Poirot, no lie can ever truly hide beneath a mask of superstition. Whether cloaked in ancient curses, shadowy figures, or whispered legends, the truth always finds its way to the surface. All it requires is a mind sharp enough to see through the smoke. Poirot's brilliance, as always, lay not in chasing physical clues, but in reading the hearts and minds of those involved. Greed, vanity, fear, they leave far clearer fingerprints than any glove or footprint. And with the little grey cells at work, no deception, no matter how ancient, can withstand the light of reason. "Do you know, Poirot," I said, as we left the manor behind, "the real curse wasn't in those artifacts at all. It was Marcus's obsession. He wasn't just cursed, he was possessed by his own greed." Poirot smiled, his moustache perfectly immaculate. "Exactement, mon ami. The curse of man's heart. It is always more dangerous than the curse of the pharaohs." "What do you think was the biggest clue that exposed Colonel Marcus? Was it the upside-down amulet, his defensive outbursts, or the victim's links to the artifacts?" Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hercule Poirot would be most interested in your deductions. If you enjoyed this classic Hercule Poirot mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more brilliant Poirot cases to life. And trust me, mon ami, the next mystery will be even more baffling. Stay tuned for more deadly puzzles, clever clues, and of course, the brilliance of Hercule Poirot.